Well, good day. Sometimes I decide to come to you completely casual, and this is one of those days because I do not want the platform, the message, the under nor overtone of this medium, this show, this series called what? Evolve Weekly, and including and beyond the 52-week series on how to form or how to implement a more perfect union. More specifically, of course, how to implement a more perfect union. So I come casual every once in a while because this is not intended to be intimidating. In fact, it's intended to be the exact opposite. All right. So I am Tiger Sydney Acute McDaniel, and I am your host of Evolve Weekly. Welcome to week 20. We've skipped some weeks because of the holiday, but now we're back on track and ready to move forward, and we've got a lot still yet to discuss. So very much. I hope that this platform is catching on, and I have received some mild response, I guess, as it relates to it catching on for different sectors of my immediate community. And I'm hoping that it is creating a bit of a buzz in other communities as well, because at the end of the day, this plan can't be written by Tigress McDaniel alone. It just can't be. We have so many different aspects of this plan, the strategic plan that I'm asserting is equivalent to rewriting the Constitution or a more perfect union or reform, all the things that we kind of, these words, colloquialisms that we use to describe the change and transformation we want to see in America. America, number one, was an experiment. I know some of you are not familiar with that. It was an experiment. It was an experiment. An unethical experiment at its, and I'm looking up because it's a double-edged sword. Unethically driven because the intention was to displace whomever was occupying the land when they discovered it, So that part, we can't, we're not even going to rehash it because it can't be rehashed. It was wrong, and wrong. Okay. And in this experiment, even those who were front and center when the agreements, the treaties were being written, the inception of what we now know as Constitution and statutory law and all these things, maritime, all these things that, of course, had influence from the colonizers' previous place in society and the rule that they were subject to, right? And so they took these bits and pieces, and effectually a lot of people also have described America as like, a monopoly game in a lot of different ways. And effectually, unfortunately, and straightly, it was ran as much like the game. And I'm chewing my words just a bit because we're not actually going to talk about the experiment of America today in great depth, but I am setting the tone for a future session that we will dedicate to the experiment that is America, that is the corporation, the United States of America. And why? Because too many people, especially those, and I've seen it firsthand, and it can be very high tensions when intending to share information from the legal academia, and even economics to individuals who just see commonsensically that, hello, common sense is, is staring us all in the face, and we know that something's wrong, and we know that if something is wrong, we just don't keep letting it go on and just blindly sit back and say, oh yeah, that's wrong, oh that's wrong, and we'll just sit on our porch, on our proverbial life porch, and rock away as we just look at look at the passers-by like, damn, that's crazy, that's wrong, that's all of this is wrong, right? We don't want to do that. That does not build, or I'm going to assert, it does not correct the unethically driven motives of the founding fathers. There is a way to get America going in a good direction. There is a way. And understand that the individuals who are the naysayers, or those who are not on the right side of justice, as I keep iterating and reiterating, they are the minority. They know that they are the minority. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of different situations, they are the wealth majority, but they are the per capita minority. And so we can change that. And especially during situations, or I don't want to call it a situation, during times like these, where if properly done, if diligently undertaken, if ethically driven, you can really grasp a hold of your financial stability, if not financial viability, into perpetuity, like legacy, really building wealth, right? Prosperity. And that can level the playing field, because that's also what needs to occur. Because unfortunately, even though money itself is not evil, and that can be argued, we know it can be argued, okay? The greed, the worship of money, the way that money is used primarily in America, is definitely connected very inseparably to evil and corruption. And corruption, and I know that people don't like to hear these terms because they want to hear that they can fix something right away, and they don't want to hear obfuscation. They don't want to hear corruption. They want to know fix now. And even under the most aggressive and transformative action, it very often does not happen overnight. And that's something that I want. I would love for transformation in a positive way to happen overnight, but it's just not realistic. And even still, we have to worry about when we do get, when we're able to secure that type of sweeping legislation, we must understand, because otherwise you would be going into a fight blindly. No offense. If you do not consider that your enemy will counterattack, right? So we must plan, we must approach this implementation of a more perfect union just like it is a battle. Maybe not an actual physical war, which we don't want to see. Unfortunately, it is always a spiritual war, because the reality is to, if one allows themselves to engage corruption to the extent that we've seen, then they must abandon, very commonsensical morals. Not even necessarily those morals that we have, tightly wound in our 10 commandments, maybe in the Bible for Christianity, or tightly wound into, the principles of good character that we've learned, in school and beyond, right? It's a tough situation that we're all in. I'm telling you. I wasn't really sure if I would cover that topic in toto today. Well, it wouldn't be in toto, but that I would start on that. But then I decided that we have more pressing business to handle. The unfortunate story that we hear too often in Black America. A Black man is falsely accused, prematurely, dismissively accused, presumed guilty. He must prove his innocence. You understand me? One such guy, and these men, they are ultimately convicted, right? And then they spend years in prison wrongfully, and they maintain their innocence, and they try everything within their power to prove their innocence and regain their freedom and their rights and exoneration, right? One such guy is Kevin Strickland in the state of Missouri. Some of you may know of this gentleman. I heard of his situation once before, but I thought surely that it was resolved because the state prosecutor came forward and has been very outspoken about the fact that it is, that when I say it, Kevin Strickland's conviction is wrongful. And she's very straightforward about it. She doesn't mince words. And again, she's done this several times publicly. And yet the governor has not stepped in and issued a pardon. He thinks that somehow that's jumping the line of protocol and that he's awaiting the decision of the state, Supreme Court, not so much as the highest court of the land, but SCOTUS, but the state Supreme Court, right, for Missouri. And evidently since that time, the state of Missouri has actually, the Supreme Court has actually returned a verdict that his conviction should not be overturned. And it's so confusing because the two individuals who did commit the triple homicide, they not only confessed, but they were tried and convicted and served and evidently sentenced only up, I guess it was 10 years. And I'm getting this information directly from Kevin Strickland's interview. And I'll actually have the link, I'll make sure the link is in the description so you can check it out yourself. And yet Kevin remains in prison. He's been there for 43 years. So the people who actually did it have been tried, convicted, sentenced, served their time, released, and he's still there. And according to him in the interview, if I remember correctly, either one of them or both of them have returned on separate convictions and served that time and been released. And he's still there, friends. So we're gonna head over to the state of Missouri. Let me start with my affirmation. And you know what? I had not, hold on. How do I want to do this? Because I'm not, I guess this go round, I failed to actually start the live when I started start the live on YouTube when I started this broadcast. So this go round, you won't actually see it live because it will actually only be a portion thereof. And I don't know how that's going to translate when I actually render the video to save and then post. So I'm not going to go live at all. But it will be posted today for your viewing convenience. All right. And so I apologize for that, but I'm very passionate about this situation. And you can see why I would very easily forget, to do that one thing when this very exceptionally more important thing is occurring. All right, so we're going to go to the state of Missouri, and we're going to start with the affirmation. May I further enlighten and enlarge our collective and individual understanding on the topics that we will discuss, and may I not further divide. Okay, so we've got 36 minutes. So let's go ahead and go over here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. I pulled up some things. First, we're going to seemingly jump around, and we may have to definitely do further survey of the Missouri legislature on next week as well. But again, I told you, when there are pressing issues that arise and that I believe we will all agree are important to highlight and pause our study on the state legislatures or incorporate it into our sessions, then, so be it. And I believe that you all will agree that Kevin Strickland's freedom is of greater importance. All right, so let me pull up, let me see here, see if there's any change. The Midwest Innocence Project. Okay. So he spoke in an interview in November 5th, 2019 in the visiting room at Western Missouri Correctional Center in Cameron. He now uses a wheelchair because medical issues keep him from standing for more than a few minutes at a time. Okay. This article was published, as you see, May 10th, 2021. The Midwest Innocence Project, working in partnership with international law firm Brian Cave Lighton Peisner, BCLP, has filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus to the Missouri Supreme Court seeking the release and exoneration of their client, Kevin Strickland. Jackson County prosecuting attorney Gene Peters Baker, whose office prosecuted Strickland in 1979. My goodness, I was born in 1976. My goodness, and I'm 44, so my goodness, he's been in there my entire life. My goodness. But you see, the prosecutors, they agree that Strickland is innocent and has joined in calling for his release. We are grateful to Gene Peters Baker and the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office for their support of Mr. Strickland's innocence and their work reviewing his case, stated MIP's Midwest Innocence Project Executive Director Tricia Rojo Bushnell. The evidence of Mr. Strickland's innocence is clear, and we applaud the prosecutor's office for fulfilling their duty as ministers of justice to ensure that justice is done. In this case, doing everything possible to help exonerate an innocent man. Now, I want to add to that statement as well. Understand that there are federal canons, C-A-N-O-N. Canons are, in religious nomenclature, it would be equal to the 10 Commandments, okay? There are judicial canons, if you will, or legal canons, if you will. And they are the principles, the highest level of standards of ethics that judges, legal professionals, licensed attorneys, of course, it would include prosecutors, are enjoined to follow, right? Amongst these canons is a standard that enjoins them, each one of them, to report unethical conduct of another of their peers. There are laws specific statutes, federal and state, that also further enjoin them, further bind them to report the unethical conduct, corruption, constructive fraud, all those things, other crimes of their peers, okay? And in many instances, they can be held liable for having express knowledge of that particular legal professional's unethical and otherwise criminal conduct and not sharing it. It can be accomplice liability, vicarious liability, conspiracy, all right? And I know it doesn't happen often, but please understand that judges can lose their license. They can lose their seat. They can be publicly reprimanded. They can be removed. Do you understand all these things? Disbarred. They can be subject to those things. And I'm floored. I'm floored as to why the Supreme Court thinks that their decision, what I saw in the video that I will be posting a link for, is that they've already ruled upon the writ of habeas corpus and they denied it. Now, of course, his team, or the team at Midwest Innocent Project, or Innocence, I don't know why I keep ending with a T, at the Midwest Innocence Project, they have filed an appeal to that order denying the writ of habeas corpus. I will look into it further. I will see what documents that I can pull from the case, what pleadings, and see if I can get a better understanding as to what it is exactly the Supreme Court opines, or opine, O-P-I-N-E. Think of opinion. It's the verb form of opinion, to opine, right? Yeah, it's something else. This also I want to make sure to read before we go into the state of Missouri, so that we understand that clearly on our list of states that really need to be reformed to the state of being on par with the transformation that we seek, the sweeping unilateral, not unilateral, the sweeping national legislation, not just like in the situation where California, it's legal to, smoke marijuana, and in many other states, it is still yet a crime, and in some states it is a high crime. Yeah, we need leveled legislation. We need to have legislation that is more indicative of the unification of American states, as opposed to the aforetime treaties, kind of these not so even though it was written into the Constitution, it was still not so binding upon each state, and they still had their own identity, if you will, from disconnecting them from the United States, but somehow still like coming together, and more so like, okay, we're an organization, but we don't have to abide by everything that big brother federal government says. And that can be, we can claim that is an overreach and then sue. That is a ridiculous, never-ending political game that we cannot ever expect to result in any type of viable transformation that we seek. It won't happen. Oftentimes, as I have reiterated and reiterated, those Republicans who are on the wrong side of justice, they will continually, endlessly wield like, I would say use, but willed is a better way. Willed is when you manipulate a tool or a toy. That's how they use legislation to befit their corruption. It's ridiculous. I know it, you know it. All right, so here, Strickland's first trial resulted in a hung jury, but he was convicted at a second trial by an all-white jury based almost entirely on unreliable eyewitness identification of the surviving victim. Having watched the interview, and I strongly suggest that you do as well, this does not detail the fraud, the corruption that happened, and the racial injustice that happened in his first trial. So evidently there was only one Black juror, and that's what hung the jury, right? Otherwise it was all white men, and they agreed that he was guilty. The one Black man, he stood his ground and believed and asserted that Kevin Strickland was innocent. And of course, fast forward, of course, that man was correct. Evidently, the prosecutor in that particular trial then whispered to Kevin in a very flagrantly disrespectful and corrupt manner that he would make sure that didn't happen again. And those of us who understand law and litigation and the rules of voir dire, VOIR, second word DIRE, which is the jury selection. It's just the Latin word or words for jury selection. There are preemptive privy that is given to each of the parties, right? Their counsel, and they can just preemptively dismiss a potential juror without giving any type of statutory basis, right? And so that's what he did. He basically made sure that in the second selection of the jury that he used up all of his passes, right, to remove any possible Black jurors on the jury. And he was successful, and it resulted in an all-white jury, as you see. And they did convict him on unreliable eyewitness identification of the surviving victim, who ironically enough, evidently has passed away, I think, since now. Let me see. Here we go. I believe she's passed away. But Douglas, this person, she repeatedly told authorities that, until her death. She passed away in 2015. She repeatedly told authorities that she had extreme doubts as to whether or not Strickland was the actual person who committed the crime. And we all know, for the threshold of burden of proof in criminal litigation or criminal trials or in criminal law, this alone, her doubt alone, would be sufficient for, a finding of not guilty. And very, very finitely so, because there is reasonable doubt. She's expressed it, and his conviction was based entirely on that eyewitness identification. And if she was not sure and reiterated the fact, reiterated her doubt over and over again, then there was not sufficient evidence to convict him. So I ask that you get on board with me. I'm working on some efforts with my for-profit corporation to see if we can't raise some funds for Kevin Strickland. I believe very strongly that The Midwest Innocence Project will be successful, but keep in mind that the state of Missouri, and we'll have to pull up that piece of legislation specifically, but as I understand from the video, the state of Missouri does not have a statute that allows for restitution to be paid or any type of monetary damages to be paid to a wrongfully convicted person, right? Like, so after they're exonerated, there is nothing in place that mandates, you know, his monetary remedies. So, and when you hear him speak in the interview, it is really, really just, it really goes straight to your heart. And just to know that he's had to have endured this for his entire life. And he speaks about his only wish mainly is to, you know, to experience the ocean. Of all the things that, you know, think about how many times you visit a beach in a year. Let's be honest about it. How many times you visit a local lake and you know, maybe paddle boat or ride, you know, in a dinner boat or dinner cruise, or how many times you've been to Myrtle Beach or any of the other beaches, or just any beach anywhere. How many times you've experienced the ocean in just 1 year? So please understand why I had to, excuse me. It's disturbing. Please understand why I had to take a moment. And let me retract this statement. I'm not trying. I shall, through the for-profit organization, or excuse me, for-profit corporation, we have a recording label, and we have produced a song called How Much Time. The video we intend to produce next week and a release either the following week or before August. And proceeds from that video, excuse me, from that that particular single release will go toward the Above Ground Railroad Commission, the ARC is what we affectionately call it, or you've just heard it, the Above Ground Railroad. And a large portion of that will go toward a fund for Kevin Strickland so that he has something when he is released. And I'm speaking it into existence. When he is released, he will need and deserve our support. I believe it very strongly. I can't even imagine what it would feel like and to come into this society. He even spoke about the fact that even when he leaves, he won't even have the wheelchair, speaking of, the wheelchair will be repossessed effectually by the prison upon his release. So I'm pretty sure that the Midwest Innocence Project is already on top of that. But let's make sure that we show him some love and support so that he doesn't come out here and just feel even more ostracized with his freedom. It's one thing to experience this isolation, you know, in an arena that is intended to isolate you as a form of punishment. Let's not subject him to isolation when he returns to society. Okay. I will make sure to post links and things of that nature as well. Okay, so we're going to quickly, and obviously we are going to have to cover the state of Missouri, the state of Missouri in next week's session as well. But it's important that we set a tone. And I pulled up these to do just that. In the beginning, when I first explained the nature of this platform, I refer to the famous phrase, a more perfect union. this phrase and the creation of the United States Constitution are synonymous with the ideology that Thomas Jefferson suggested in his letter. And I'm going to read part of his letter. This is right here. To James Madison from Thomas Jefferson, September 6, 1789. This is well over 200 years ago. Dear sir, I sit down to write to you without knowing by what occasion I shall send my letter. I do it because a subject comes into my head, which I would wish to develop a little more that is practicable in the hurry of the moment of making up general dispatches. The question whether one generation of men has a right to bind another seems never to have been started either on this or our side of the water. Yet it is a question of such consequences as not only to merit decision, but place also among the fundamental principles of every government. The course of reflection in which we are immersed here on the elementary principles of society has presented this question to my mind, and that no such obligation can be so transmitted, I think very capable of proof. I set out on this ground, which I suppose to be self-evident, that the earth belongs in usufruct to the living. Excuse me, and let me look that up. Excuse me, guys. It's just allergies. All right, let's see. Here we go. I'm not even sure what that term means. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correct as well. Usufruct. So yeah, I've seen it, so I pronounced it correctly, but I don't know the exact, so I want to make sure. It means the right to enjoy the use and advantages of another's property short of the destruction or waste of its substance. And we could use context clues to understand what he intended, but we don't just assume things around these parts, we look it up, okay? All right, so let's get back to it. And so he's basically saying, why would we bind future generations on past generations' way of doing things? And that this should be self-evident because generations change, society changes, the needs of a society change, right? And then we'll continue on, that the dead have neither powers nor rights over it, referring to the past. The portion occupied by any individual ceases to be his when himself ceases to be, and reverts to the society. Interesting. So you know how there are founding fathers or descendants of founding fathers, and they feel that they are entitled to this unlimited right into perpetuity on these very colonizer, very white supremacist, very destructive mindsets. Yeah, the economics of it was sound, if you will, but the abuse of labor, the extremist approach in applying principles, applying government systems from what they had learned from the rule that they were subject to, that's where the era and the corruption came into play. And so it is just, it's unreasonable. It is absurd for them to think that somehow they do have that entitlement. And with the change of society, no longer meeting it for many years, not meeting the needs of its inhabitants. And when I say it's, I'm referring to our body of law, state by state, federal government wise. If the society has formed no rules for the appropriation of its land in severalty, it will be taken by the first occupants. These will generally be the wife and children of the descendant. If they have formed rules of appropriation, those rules may give it to the wife and children, or to someone of them, or to the legatee of the deceased. So they may give it to his creditor, but the child, the legatee or creditor, takes it, not by any natural right, but by a law of the society of which they are members and to which they are subject. Then no man can, by natural right, oblige the lands he occupied, or the persons who succeed him in that occupation, to the payment of debts contracted by him. For if he could, he might during his own life eat up the usufruct of the lands for several generations to come. And then the lands would belong to the dead and not to the living, which would be the reverse of our principle. You understand all this, right? What is true of every member of society individually is true of them all collectively, since the rights of the whole can be no more than the sum of the rights of the individuals. To keep our ideas clear when applying them to a multitude, let us suppose a whole generation of men to be born on the same day, to attain mature age on the same day, or to die on the same day, leaving a succeeding generation in the moment of attaining their mature age altogether. Let the ripe age be of 21 years, and their period of life 34 years more, that being the average term given by the bills of mortality to persons who have already attained 21 years of age. Each successive generation would in this way come on and go off the stage at a fixed moment, as individuals do now. Then I say the earth belongs to each of these generations during its course, its own course. Fully and in their own right, the second generation receives it clear of the debts and encumbrances of the first, the third of the second, and so on. For if the first could charge it with a debt, then the earth would belong to the dead and not the living generation. Then no generation can contract debts greater than may be paid during their own course of their existence. At 21 years of age, they may bind themselves in their lands for 34 years to come. At 22, for 33. At 23, for 32, and at 54, for 1 year only, because these are the terms of life which remain to them at those respective epochs. But a material difference must be noted between the succession of an individual and that of a whole generation. Individuals are parts only of a society, subject to the laws of the whole. These laws may appropriate the portion of land occupied by the descendant to his creditor rather than to any other, or to his child or condition he satisfies the creditor. But when a whole generation, that is, the whole society dies, as in the case we have supposed, and another generation or society succeeds, this forms a whole, and there is no superior who can give that territory to a third society, who may have lent money to their predecessors beyond their faculties of paying. What is true of a generation all arriving to self-government on the same day, dying all on the same day, is true of those in a constant course of decay and renewal, with this only difference. Now, he's basically speaking in a very poetic way, but I'm sure that even though the diction is very poetic, we all generally understand the common sense behind that. Each future generation says that of their elders. Well, that doesn't work anyway. It doesn't work like that anymore, Grandma. It doesn't work like that anymore, Grandpa. These are different times. So we need different ways, different laws, different methods different approaches to handle what works for us. And it doesn't mean that you throw away standards or morals altogether. But a lot of these standards and practices and laws, there's so many laws right now that are still on the books that are completely antiquated and have absolutely no application in modern day society. In fact, when we read them aloud, they're absurd. They're ridiculously absurd. Let me see if I can get further into it. Let's see, because he goes on and on. Turn this subject in your mind, my dear sir, and particularly as to the power of contracting debts, and develop it with that perspicuity. I don't know that word either. Let's look that up really quickly. Acute perception. That makes sense. But where's I saw where we get, yeah, there we go.
Perspicuity.
Perspicuity. Okay, so acute perception. Let's go back to where he's. So develop it with that acute perception, this discernment, right? Objective thinking as well. And cogent logic, so peculiarly yours. Your station in the councils of our country gives you an opportunity of producing it to public consideration, of forcing it into discussion. At first blush, it may be rallied as a theoretical speculation, but examination will prove it to be solid and salutary. It would furnish matter for a fine preamble to our first law for appropriating the public revenue, and it will exclude at the threshold of our government the contagious and ruinous eras of this quarter of the globe, which have armed despots with means not sanctioned by nature for binding in chains their fellow men. We have already given, in example, one effectual check to the dog of war by transferring the power of letting him loose from the executive to the legislative body, from those who are to spend to those who are to pay. I should be pleased to see the second obstacle held out by us, also in the first instance. No nation can make a declaration against the validity of long contracted debts so disinterestedly as we, since we do not owe a shilling, which may not be paid with ease, principal and interest within the time of our own lives. Establish the principle also in the new land to be passed for protecting copyrights and new inventions by securing the exclusive right for 19 instead of 14 years. Besides familiarizing us to this term, it will be an instance the more of our taking reason for our guide instead of English precedent, the habit of which fetters us with all the political heresies of a nation equally remarkable for its early excitement from some eras and long slumbering under others. I write you no news, because when an occasion occurs, I shall write a separate letter for that, okay? There's also a specific area where he says, and I thought that we would get to that, and I may have skipped over it. Let me just go back. But he's speaking very, very poetically about, and you can tell that he feels that he doesn't have a lot of control, but he's going to use his voice, and he's going to use acute logic, and he's going to use natural law, and he's going to use empathy and sympathy, and emotives, in fact. He's speaking to the man. He's using economics, the logistics of economics, the common sense logistics of economics as well, and telling him, we should not do this into perpetuity. We cannot bind the next generation with our methodology, especially if it's rooted in, as he said, heresies and eras and what? Enslaving our fellow man. that there should be a change of the Constitution to befit each future generation. And there should be a defined period for that revision of the Constitution, so that there is a standardization of ensuring that it befits the future generation accordingly. I know that this seems like a lot. And this is why it's just so applicable right now to not only Kevin Strickland's situation, but Missouri as a whole. To learn in 2021 that he remains imprisoned after those who have actually committed the crime have been tried, convicted, sentenced, served their sentence, released, and even returned to prison on separate convictions and have been released from that sentence, and Kevin Strickland still remains. To know that the prosecutors and all of the, I would imagine, because the prosecutor does represent that entire district, if you will, because they represent the state, right? They are the state's attorney. They've spoken out over and over again, and they're demanding, they've come together collectively to demand his release. And yet he hasn't been released. And even when he is released, the state of Missouri does not have a statutory provision to render unto Kevin Strickland what he is rightfully due, monetary damages. That's a problem. This is one of the many, many reasons, the many examples across this country for the purpose of this platform, the purpose of this 52-week series on how to implement a more perfect union. I know I spent the entire time on Kevin Strickland and the very, in my opinion, poignantly, poignantly, pointingly accurate analysis suggested and asserted by Thomas Jefferson. I think it was worth it to spend the time. I hope you agree with me, and I hope you understand why I decided to come casual, and you understand what I intend for this platform. I alone cannot do it myself, but that does not stop me. I am determined to motivate, to inspire, to justify, to validate, whatever term it is that will get you involved and help me to help us form and implement a more perfect union. Greater good is not an ulterior motive. So I'm very, very much so just moved by his story. And I would love for you to share with me any other similar stories. And I want us to connect and bring this to fruition together. It can be done. It's a very simple concept rooted in very commonsensical natural law ideologies. And we don't need the permission of the past. Even though there were some in our past who truly understood this to be most viable for future generations. So when I say we don't need the permission of our past, we don't need the permission of naysayers. We don't need the permission of white supremacists. We don't need their permission to implement a more perfect union. And the irony is that if they truly understood and would embrace a logical interaction, a healthy interaction with fellow men, just as Thomas Jefferson has stated, many Caucasian men felt the same way. Many Caucasian women felt the same way. And this is why you always hear me say that not everybody that's for you is against you. Sorry, that was, sorry. Not everybody that looks like you is for you, right? And equally, not everybody who doesn't look like us is not necessarily our enemy. We need to come together with those who are on the right side of justice. We need to aggressively and deliberately identify those who are on the wrong side of justice. And then we need to move forward toward the greater good of those of us who believe that the experiment of America can be corrected with our collective evolution. Again, my name is Tigress Sydney Acute McDaniel, and this is Evolve Weekly. Join me next week, and we will survey the Missouri legislature. Have a wonderful week.